Hey everybody, welcome back to GameStudiously. Before jumping into BioShock Infinite, I just wanted to say a simple thank you to all of you who supported me on the first video, and with the channel in general. So the first video got like 20 subs to the channel and 100 views, and maybe that doesn't sound like a lot, but each one was important to me. I really care about this project, and the fact that you would go out of your way to support me in some way, that's really nice of you. So, I don't want to waste any more time because this video is surprisingly long, but thank you so much. Without any further ado, let's get into it. So, I was talking to some friends about the channel recently, and I came to the realization that not all of us are gamers. And even more frighteningly, some of us gamers haven't played BioShock Infinite, like me 3 months ago. So, given that, I wanted to set a precedent with this channel that every time we start a new discussion, new video game to talk about, I'm going to take a little bit of time in the first video to just go over some of the basic information. Who released the game, when it's from, what genre it belongs to, and then go over plot details, so that people who aren't fluent in the game, or haven't played it for whatever reason, can still participate in the discussion, or at least understand what's going on. Be warned, to have a constructive discussion about BioShock Infinite, we're going to have to talk about the ending, so this video is going to contain spoilers. So if you haven't played through the game and you're still looking to, I recommend that you pause me, go buy the game, beat the game, and then unpause me. And then you can come back and join the discussion later. Sound good? Let's roll. Here's what you need to know about BioShock Infinite right up front. So the game is released in March of 2013. It's developed by a company called Irrational Games under the creative direction of Ken Levine, and it's published by 2K Games. If you're not familiar, the relationship of a developer to a publisher is much like that of an author to a publisher. The author, or the developer, is the artist that makes the work, and the publisher is the group with all the money and the resources to distribute it, and then they collect a little money on the end. But Irrational Games is who you should really associate with it. BioShock Infinite is what you would call a AAA release, which is similar to a film's blockbuster. It's a big deal when it comes out, there's a lot of money pumped into it, it's worked on by hundreds of people, it's a big release. And finally, it belongs to what would be called the first-person shooter genre. So most people are probably familiar with that by the Call of Duty series, but all that first-person shooter implies is that the camera takes the viewpoint of a character, and that character shoots at things. That's it. So, plot. You begin the game as a man on a rowboat in 1912 headed toward the lighthouse. Once you're there, you're presented with a mysterious task by an unidentified employer. Bring us the girl and wipe away the debt. You are this man, Booker DeWitt, former Pinkerton soldier with a muddy past and seeming gambling debt. Not much for baptisms. This is the girl you're after, Elizabeth Comstock, supposed heir to Columbia's ruler Zachary Hale Comstock. She's trapped in a tower but wants to go to Paris and has a bit of her pinky missing. So, you end up rocketing up to Columbia, the city in the sky, and getting a first-hand view of Columbian society on your quest to get Elizabeth to New York. Columbia is on the brink of a civil war between the founders and the Vox Populi, Latin for Voice of the People, over issues of harsh classism, economic inequality, and racial segregation. On your quest to help Elizabeth escape from Columbia, you end up discovering her ability to open up holes in space-time, known as tears. These tears reach to the other realities that are created by every instance of choice or chance. In gameplay, these are mostly used to bring resources to you during combat sequences. In the narrative, these are used by Booker and Elizabeth to find a reality with conditions that allow their escape. Eventually, your adventure leads you to uncovering the history behind Columbia and Comstock. You learn that Rosalind Lutece, the scientist who discovered the physics that made a floating city possible, also developed a method for crossing universes that helped Comstock kidnap Elizabeth. You end up being sent by Elizabeth through multiple realities that show your failure to save her. In one, she fulfills the prophecy of raining down fire on the world below. In the next, you kill Comstock in a fit of rage after he tells Elizabeth that you know why she's missing part of her pinky. Ultimately, you and Elizabeth are able to destroy her tower and the huge electrical siphon inside that restrained her power. In a moment of distress, she blinks both of you to another reality. All of a sudden, you're in rapture.
City at the bottom of the ocean. Ridiculous.
The two of you ride up to the surface and find yourself in an infinity of lighthouses, each one a door to another reality. Elizabeth guides you through several doors, showing you the truth behind your past and the quest you're on. Booker, after accumulating his post-war debt, accepted a deal to trade a girl to clear it. But it wasn't Elizabeth. It was his daughter. That sentence is gonna fall apart in a few moments. After exposing you to that, Elizabeth takes you to kill Comstock, something you've already done. But as Elizabeth explains...
Stock? No. He is alive in a million worlds. It's not over because the Prophet is dead. It will only be over when he never even lived in the first place.
Then we get a scene where Booker, desperate to undo the horrible mistake of trading his daughter, rushes to take her back from Comstock. Just as Comstock is slipping through the tear with your daughter, it closes, severing a piece of her pinky. Finally, we step through a door to a baptism that took place after Booker's war experiences, the point in time where he decided to accept the baptism and be reborn as Zachary Hale Comstock. To stop the horrible things that have happened to Elizabeth from happening, all the many versions of Elizabeth have to drown Booker before he can make the decision to be born again. This way, Comstock can never live. And Elizabeth, at least in the way that we know her, can't either. And that's the end. And I thought I could do a nice, concise summary of BioShock Infinite. Well, summary's done. Let's get into what you really wanted to talk about. The Great Gatsby. Like my favorite book, The Great Gatsby, BioShock Infinite does three things. 1. It starts with a weird fictional epigraph. 2. It offers a really large-scale criticism of American culture in the early part of the 20th century. And 3. Inside of that criticism, it contains a deep, beautiful human story. I love you, Gatsby. Oh, come on. It came up kind of organically. Anyway, let's talk about politics, huh? In an interview on, I think, PCGamer.com, Ken Levine said that the game isn't about racism or politics, it's about history. He goes on and explains that he's a student of US history and that people are inherently of their time, so if you pull a progressive out of 1912 and put them in our time, they probably look pretty not progressive. And all that's true. But to say that the game is about history, or even suggest that it might be apolitical, would sort of understate what's going on in Colombia. Because come on, BioShock Infinite isn't set in turn-of-the-century Boston or Philadelphia. It's set in the sky. Let's be clear, for all the historical content in BioShock Infinite, it is still very much a creation, a fiction. Sometimes the cultural themes are really explicit, like with the 3 physical spaces we'll explore later, but sometimes the developers can convey a cultural criticism in really subtle, non-verbal ways. Sometimes those are the most interesting. We'll start there. This is some of my favorite stuff because it just shows you how well a game world can communicate ideas to a player without using any words at all. Among the first images we get in playing Infinite is the Ascension. I'm not saying it's super subtle, but the idea is that we're going up to heaven. Hallelujah, bright lights, lovely music, the whole 9 yards. Then what happens immediately afterwards? An elevator back down. Did you notice the other elevators in the game? Maybe a descending elevator and really red lighting? You know what that means. Columbia is not heaven. It's hell. Hard to imagine a harsher criticism than that. But it doesn't take a single word. Elevators aren't the only architecture telling us the story of Columbia, though. Notice the abundance of gears in the game? Maybe not, but your brain did. And after it scoffed at steampunk aesthetics, it probably registered something on the level of social engineering or beautifully fitting in. Cogs in the machine, you know? And this resonates on the level of Columbia as a society. And again, all this meaning is made non-verbally. Awesome. But sometimes the symbols are organic. Another motif that non-verbally tells us a lot about Columbia is the presence of animals. You probably noticed the abundance of birds in the game, and we'll talk about those in a second, but let's start with the pigs. Early on in the game, Booker passes through the blue ribbon, a fancy, deserted restaurant in Colombia. The advertising outside the restaurant features a pig, which conjures up all the values we associate with pigs. Filthiness and gluttony primarily. This tells us a little part of Colombia's story. A story of haves and have-nots. A story of class inequality. But let's get into the important stuff. The birds and the bees. Ooh yeah. Let's start with eagles. In Colombia, which is highly concentrated with American imagery and symbols, we might expect to see a lot of eagles. However, I only noticed 2 examples. First, in the Soldiers Field Welcome Center, there's this big eagle statue in the propaganda center of the game. Then the second example was so obvious I almost missed it. The silver eagle. It's on the money. So these values that we traditionally associate with eagles, freedom, liberty, individualism, they get supplanted by Colombia's true values, which are propaganda and money. A more prominent bird than the eagle in Colombia is actually the crow. These are best seen in the Fraternal Order of the Raven's headquarters. We associate these birds with much darker themes than the eagle. Crows are not individual. They travel in groups called murders. They're ominous, they denote death. They're almost the opposite of eagles in what they implicitly convey to us. So far, we've seen birds in the game used to let us know that Colombia is not the paradise that it would suggest it is. On the inside, its values are totally contradictory to what we might expect. But then there are these little guys. Hummingbirds float around in a few spots in the game, and they show up in that kinectoscope, but why? Truthfully, I have very little idea what the hummingbirds are doing in this game, so if you have any ideas as to why they're there, let me know in the comments. Let everybody know. I've seen a few suggestions, but it's sort of a mystery. The one horrifying thought I have is, what if they're just hummingbirds? But I worry I'm forgetting a bird. Oh god, what is it? Songbird, okay. I wish I could say something about an obvious symbolism there, but Songbird is a mechanical birdsuit with a human inside. That doesn't come preloaded with a lot of cultural meaning, but Elizabeth's relationship to Songbird is very emotionally complicated. He's been the agent keeping her trapped all these years, but at the same time, he was her only friend. He brought her food and, more importantly, her books. It's sad when Songbird dies because, at the end of the day, he only wanted to protect her. This isn't about birds anymore, is it? Okay, let's talk about bees. Maybe you didn't notice them, maybe you did, but they're there all along helping to shape our understanding of Colombian culture. The first place we see them is in the God Only Knows airship. They're not really doing much there, but hey, they're around. The next time you see one is during an elevator ride you take with Elizabeth. One slips in through a tear. Like the moral compass of the game should, Elizabeth gives us her thoughts.
Oh, it's a bee. I hate these things.
Jeez, just kill it.
No, it'll sting me.
Elizabeth.
But bees are really examined in a piece of propaganda you encounter while riding in an elevator in Finkton. Fink stresses that his employees should be the bee, and he's rather explicit about his meaning.
What is the most admirable creature on God's green earth? Why, it's the bee! Have you ever seen a bee on vacation? Have you ever seen a bee take a sick day? Well, my friends, the answer is no. So I say, be the bee! Be the bee!
Bees are, of course, dutiful. They work hard. Bees are anonymous. They don't speak up. They support Colombia's hive, and for a lot of us, that probably got the wheels turning towards the term hive mind. Bees are small, and they don't come up too often, but they're there, just shaping our notions of Colombian ideology all along the way. Okay, So if the animal motif got a little bit abstract towards the end, we're going to reel it back in with the examination of 3 physical spaces for cultural criticism. Our first stop is at the headquarters for the Fraternal Order of the Raven. This is a building Booker has to pass through on his way to Elizabeth's Tower, and it is jam-packed with racist ideology. You see, the Fraternal Order is a sect of the conservative Colombian population that seeks above all else to defend Colombia's racial purity. Their slogan, a Latin phrase, translates to, "We dare defend our country." Let's take you on a tour of the crib. Once in the door, you'll find a statue of John Wilkes Booth, that guy that shot Abe Lincoln. In the neighboring rooms, you'll find pictures of Lincoln, that damned emancipator of slaves, adorned with devil's horns and glowing eyes. They have a little church in the building for their private services, but they don't take too kindly to unannounced visitors. Inside, you'll find a picture of good old George Washington hovering above a bunch of super racialized caricatures. There's a great big sign that says, "Protecting Our Race," and this awful phrenological study of the Native American brain. And if you aren't sold on my argument that the place is a huge construction to criticize racism, you should meet the hosts. The members of the Order all wear dark cloaks with, of course, pointed hoods. But maybe you're saying to yourself, what if the people at Irrational Games are advocating for racism? If you feel that way, I turn your attention to 3 facts. 1. Everybody inside tries to kill you. Not a good sign. 2. The place is a filthy, rotting mess. Ravens and rotting food are everywhere, seriously. The dining room is like a 200 square foot squalid testament to excess. And 3, there's a permanent storm cloud hovering over the building. I have no idea how weather works in Colombia, but I know that in art, clouds typically mean you're in for a bad time. Infinite might not be about racism, but it certainly has a lot to say about it. So that's racism, but after Booker pushes past the Order and rescues Elizabeth from her tower, he finds himself in a whole different theme park. I guess they are all just virtual theme parks. Epiphanies aside, let's look at the Hall of Heroes. Booker and Elizabeth have to come here to acquire Shock Jockey, basically an electrical power-up that will let them power a gondola and ride it up to their airship and escape. Of course, the trip turns into a jarring bloodbath. You arrive at the Hall of Heroes, which is actually some combination of theme park and museum, which celebrates 2 battles that Booker participated in as a soldier, the Boxer Rebellion in China and the battle at Wounded Knee. But before even entering, you realize that the place is out of commission. It's been taken over by Cornelius Slate, an old comrade of Booker's. Slate has been disavowed by Father Comstock, who built the Hall of Heroes to celebrate his actions as a supposed war hero. But Slate, who shouts at Booker over a loudspeaker whilst he explores the various exhibits, is incessant in claiming that Comstock's history is false. The sacrifices that he and his men made in the wars have been wiped away. Comstock takes all the glory for their sacrifice. After reminding Booker of his violent past, Slate demands that Booker give them all a soldier's death. They'd rather die by the gun than be erased by the history books. I think the game has something to say about history. Something important. A lot of us might be familiar with the phrase, "history is written by the victors," and this section of the game gives us a really dramatic reminder that history is a story. It's subjective. The game as a whole lets us jump in and out of multiple realities, and see history as it's being written by multiple victors. And we see that victory through violence, it's ugly no matter who's writing the story. The game also says something about violence. There's a message painted on the wall in one room that says, "Tin soldiers don't fight wars, men do." Absolutely true. The exhibits in the museum animate war. They sterilize it and glorify it. It's easy to become desensitized to violence when we're presented with it in media that don't show us the ugly human consequences of war. When we play video games, we're stepping into a Tin Man and shooting down lines of code. I think games can tell beautiful human stories, but there is a danger in violent games of desensitizing the player to violence. Elizabeth awakens Booker, and by extension us, to this problem. By the time we reach the Hall of Heroes, we've been shooting and incinerating and ripping the faces off of various enemies for hours, but Elizabeth has just met us. She's been tucked away safely in her tower for almost 20 years, and then she sees us mow through dozens of soldiers like it's nothing. She asks Booker if he ever gets used to the violence.
Do you ever get used to it? The killing.
Faster than you can imagine.
And not to get too metagaming on you, but I think that comment is supposed to reach through Booker and hit us. A lot of the times in games, we'll play as characters who use violence as a necessity, but don't enjoy it. But we have a sort of visceral pleasure when we play these sorts of games. Like Booker says,
You showed me. Sometimes you have to do what's necessary to survive.
There's survival, and then there's finding pleasure in the act.
Booker.
Look,
I'm not at all saying that video games cause real-world violence, because I think that's a terrible argument. But I think there can be a good discussion on why we enjoy these sorts of games, why we enjoy those sorts of movies, why shell out good money to wield a gun or watch an actor do the same. It's sort of a touchy subject for a lot of people, but if you have any thoughts, hit up the comment section. I'd be happy to see what you think. Alright, so we've made it 2/3 of the way through our journey, and here we are arriving at Finkton. Finkton is a sort of industrial town in Colombia named for Jeremiah Fink, Colombia's very own Mr. Monopoly. Welcome to Finkton. Elizabeth and Booker enter illegally, of course, after the hours that Finkton is recruiting any workers. Finkton is, best as I can see, a huge monument to capitalism. And of course, all its problems. You have the golden statue of the leader, but economic inequality is so harsh here that you feel like you're reading The Jungle. Finkton has a nice club, the Good Times Club, which serves as entertainment for some, and a torture den for the less fortunate. Finkton offers housing for its employees, labeled by its tenants as Shantytown, and pays them generously in currency that can only be used to purchase Fink goods. Take an elevator down to their tenements and you'll see how foul their lives are. Families and children are unable to eat, their houses are condemned. These people have nothing. Yet above them in more fortunate parts of the city, there are plenty of people who either don't know their condition, or simply don't care. In essence, I think this area of the city tells us the story of Colombia's economic inequality. If you see something additional here, let me know. Maybe just writing it off as a condemnation of capitalism is short-sighted, but that's what I took from it. So, here we are. We've toured 3 of the most politically charged locations, not just in BioShock Infinite, but really in any games I've played, and probably not really liked what we've seen. Ken Levine says that the game is not about politics and not about racism, but I'd say he's just being coy. The game is loaded with political content. I wouldn't say it's a direct assault on people who would worship the Founding Fathers as deities, but, well, I'll let you decide. I would just say that it's really not a coincidence that a Tea Party supporting Facebook group uploaded Colombian propaganda unknowingly last year. Yeah, it's not an accident. This rant has gone on long enough, so I'm going to close it here. If BioShock Infinite and its city of Columbia don't convince you that games are totally viable and meaningful and important texts that deserve just as much critical attention as we give to film or literature, then I don't think anything will. We'll be back next time to have a much more focused discussion on the game's protagonist, Booker DeWitt. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit all the support buttons on the top and bottom and side of the video. This has been GameStudiously. I'll see you next week.